Welcome to another episode of Jamming with Jason. Hey, today we are going to dig into the age-old question, is the glass half empty or is it half full? And by the time that we're done, you're actually going to realize that the glass is always full. And I'm going to explain exactly how to do that and give you a tip in today's episode. So, with that, let's cue that episode now. Hi, I'm Jason Mefford, and you're in the right place to start transforming your career and life with this podcast. I've been in the trenches as an executive leader, and now I'm an executive coach and confidential advisor to executives all over the world. I use a multidisciplinary approach to improve learning that drives transformation by getting to the root cause in a practical, no-nonsense way. I love learning and sharing what makes people tick. You get both education and entertainment, since learning shouldn't be boring, right? But that's enough about me. This podcast is a combination of intuitive leadership, neural influence, and mental mastery to take your career and life to levels you've never thought possible. If you're wanting to improve yourself, develop stronger relationships professionally and personally, make quicker, better decisions, and become a more effective leader, then of course, this podcast is for you because you are going to learn how to manage emotions in yourself and others, avoid burnout, stress, and anxiety, master your mind, get people to listen and take action, and become a lifelong learner. And when you do that, you will have a positive mental attitude, executive leadership presence, and the skills to know exactly what to say and do in any situation. I'm glad you're here. So, let's get started. All right, so today's discussion, let's talk again. There's that age-old thing, and I'm sure you've heard this before. You're sitting there and you look at a glass of water, or hey, whatever you want to put in it, right? Whiskey, beer, wine, water, soda, whatever that we're looking at. But you're seeing this glass and it's filled half with liquid. Now, there's again the age old thing is, well, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? Now, the way that you answer that usually has been determined on whether or not you consider yourself to be an optimist or a pessimist, right? So if you're an optimist, and in theory, they say, look, you would say the glass is half full because you're seeing what's there. If you're a pessimist, then you would be saying the glass is half empty. Okay, so that's kind of the way that this is normally kind of talked about. And we're going to dig into this a little bit deeper. And I know you might be sitting here at the beginning of this and thinking, Jason, why are we actually talking about this today? Okay. Well, I went back and did some different research. And again, based on my training, I look at numbers, I look at information that's out there, and I kind of scratch my head when things don't seem to make a lot of sense. And so there's some things that you see statistically out there that don't make a lot of sense that I want to talk about today. But also, there's a lot of research out there that shows that the more optimistic someone is, the healthier they are. And in fact, on the inverse side, pessimists on average die younger than people who are considered to be optimists. It also has a direct correlation back with some of the health issues that people deal with as well. And part of that is, again, based on how you view the world, what your interpretations are of what's going on, but that it can actually have a real and scientifically proven impact on your health. So, again, if you want to be pessimistic, if you want to stay that way, always see the negative in everything. It's your choice. You can do that. But I'm just here to tell you that it's probably going to lead to some health problems if it hasn't already. It may lead to some other mental illness issues as well. And we're going to talk more about that as well. Now, part of the issue, again, kind of with this, is that there's been a lot of stuff going on recently. Really for about the last year. In fact, we're here into towards the end of January, and I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they said, it's almost been a year that we've been living with all of this COVID stuff going on in the world. And it kind of reminded me and stopped me and went, yeah, our first shutdown here in California was back in March of last year. So it has almost been a year. And what we're starting to see as well is some of the impacts that is having on people. People are feeling more isolated. They're seeing a lot of negativity in the press, in the national, in the international news that you can see. And really, it's our perspective on how we're viewing the world around us that helps to determine how positive or negative or optimistic or positive or pessimistic that we may actually be, right? And what I'm seeing and what the numbers are starting to come back is, what, no matter how optimistic and positive you think you are, after a while, it just starts to grind on you. Okay. It just starts to grind on you. And it's hard to keep the positive attitude when you're seeing a bunch of negative things around you. And a lot of people have been feeling this. This is leading people into, some mild depression, some feelings of isolation, and other things like that, that we weren't experiencing maybe a year ago because we weren't living with this current world that we are in. So again, one of the reasons why I want to talk about this is, I mean, there's obviously some health issues that can relate to it, but also, most of the people that listen to me actually also come from the internal audit risk and compliance area. And professionally, we are usually taught to see on the negative side or be pessimistic, be skeptical in what we're looking at. In fact, when I was talking with somebody today, and they actually shared a story with me. They were having a disagreement with someone in the organization, another executive, and the person was being overly optimistic in the way that this internal audit person was looking at it and saying, well, and that's where they stopped and actually said, you are a glass half empty kind of person. I'm a glass half full person. This is why we're having the disagreement. And the person in audit said, well, that's I understand that because that's my responsibility, right? Is to look for the negative or that kind of side of it. And so I get it. I understand. We have been taught that way. That's really our kind of professional training and what we end up looking at a lot of the time. Now, the problem is because we have been taught to do that professionally, and we get stuck into, doing that so much professionally that sometimes that ends up carrying over into our personal life as well. And so again, today I want to talk a little bit about and give you a tip on how to get out of that if you find yourself in that situation. Now, again, I'm sure as you're listening to this, you're thinking, Jason, I don't have any problem with this. I'm a very positive, very optimistic person. So let's talk about some numbers here for just a minute, okay? Because again, I told you when I went back and looked at the numbers, some of the numbers don't make sense, folks. So this is again where we're gonna kind of go through this. So at least a study that I looked at here in the United States, when people were asked, "Are you an optimist or a pessimist?" Okay, so that was the question. Are you an optimistic person or a pessimistic person? 50% of the people said that they believed they were an optimistic person. 50%. Okay. Makes sense, right? 50% optimistic, maybe 50% pessimistic, right? That's how you might look at it statistically. Well, the interesting thing is 50% said they're an optimist, 43% said they're somewhere in between, and only 4 to 6% of people actually admitted that they're a pessimist. Okay, those numbers don't add up. Do you get that? Did you hear what I just said? 50% think they're optimistic, 43% say they're somewhere in the middle. So they're neither pessimistic nor optimistic. And only about 4 to 6% of the people actually admit that they are, on average, more pessimistic. Those numbers don't line up. Okay. You either are or you aren't. It's a binary thing. And yes, I understand why 43% of the people would say, well, maybe sometimes I'm optimistic, but sometimes I'm pessimistic. So I'm neither one all of the time. And I get that. I mean, that happens all the time. We can be optimistic about certain things and pessimistic about other things. In fact, on average, people tend to be optimistic when they're talking about micro things or things that relate to themselves, but very pessimistic when it's about politics, it's about national, international kind of things, tend to be very pessimistic about those things instead. In fact, another study that I looked at, and again, this is from uh, data all around the world, but what I will tell you is the average in the developing nations is very similar to this information that I'm going to share about the United States. There's some that are, higher, lower, but on average, the median for the developing world is about the same. And this was the question that was asked there is, do you think the future is better financially for younger people, or is the past better? So, are younger people going to be better off financially in the future than their parents were? And only 6% of people in the United States think that young people will be better off than their parents. That means 94% of people think they're going to be worse off. So they have a very pessimistic outlook on the future financially for young people. Okay. And again, if 50% of the people are saying that they're optimists, those numbers don't really line up, right? Because 94% of the people are being pessimistic about that particular thing that we're talking about. Okay, so why am I going into all of this? Well, part of it is just to shake you a little bit, give you a little bit of a love tap, in that, no matter how optimistic you believe you are, you may not be as optimistic as you think you are. Okay, and so again, going back to cognitive biases, it's very clear for people, for 50% of the people to say, well, yeah, I think I'm optimistic, right? Because again, that is a cognitive bias that ends up creeping into where we believe that we're much more optimistic than we are. Okay, so let me just ask a few questions, right? And again, it's nothing, good or bad that I'm trying to get at here. But what I'm trying to teach you and show you is a way that you can change the interpretations that you have of what is going on around you. Because the thing is, a lot of people get into a victim mentality when they are feeling pessimistic, and they think things are happening to them and they cannot control these things. Where again, a different interpretation would be, things don't happen to me, things happen for me, and I can control and have influence over the circumstances and conditions in my life. And that's where I want to help you get to, so that you get out of being pessimistic about the future is going to be crap. Things are actually getting worse. And there's a reason why a lot of people feel that way is, in a lot of the different media that we consume. So for example, another thing that's out there is, a lot of people believe that crime and violence is going up. Now, why would they believe that? And part of the reason is, there's a lot of television shows, there's a lot of news, it's 24/7 now, where they choose to focus on a lot of the stuff that leads to fear. And so a lot of the things that are reported on are these negative things that put people in fear. And so the criminal activity, violence, other things like that are shown in the media, but it's actually a very, very small percentage of what is actually going on. Because again, if you go back and you take a look at the data, in fact, criminal activity has and violence has decreased steadily for many, many years, even though, again, the perception by a lot of people is, oh, it's becoming a more violent world in general. Okay. And so part of the reason why a lot of people feel pessimistic is, again, because they're getting fed all of this stuff and that's what they're seeing all of the time. Okay. So, one tip for you is if you're feeling stressed out, if you're feeling fearful, if you're feeling anxiety because of all of these bad things that you're afraid are going to happen, just stop listening to everything. Now, I quit actually listening to the news many, many years ago. I quit reading the newspaper. I do actually, stay current on some of the current events, but the reality is most of it does not affect me, and it doesn't actually apply to me. And I think I shared earlier on the podcast, when my father-in-law was still alive, he used to like to watch the evening news. And so when we would go up and be with them in the evening, a lot of times I would sit there and watch the news with him. And we live in the Los Angeles area. There's 20 plus million people in the Los Angeles area, so a lot of people. But if I were to watch just what was going on the news there, they're reporting a break-in and they're reporting a car chase and a something else in a 30-minute segment. Most of the stories are going to be kind of negative in that regards, right? Um, and when you consider the percentage of that in comparison to the 20 plus million people that are here, it's a very, very small percentage of what's actually going on, right? In fact, 99.9% of the people that are out there are doing good things, are good people, and we have nothing to worry about. Okay. So again, a lot of this, it comes back to your interpretation and your perspective on things as well. So, again, don't feed yourself necessarily with things that do not relate to you, that do not actually help you. And later on, I'm going to talk about a thing called 7 interpretations. That's a tool that you can actually use for this. Now, again, as I told you, I understand that many of you are trained to always look for the risk, look for problems, because that's what we do in our profession. Okay. But again, just like I was talking about from the media or anything else like that, when you are constantly hearing about negative things, that ends up carrying over into your emotional state and how you feel as well. So again, you have to be able to flip the switch and separate business from your personal life. Now, I know, it's easy to say, well, I do that already, but it's much more difficult than that, okay? And I will, totally understand that because I've had the same thing. You come home after a hard day at work, a lot of stress, a lot of negativity, you're not feeling so good, and something ends up going wrong and you end up maybe not acting the way that you normally would under a normal situation. And this ends up happening a lot whenever we're hungry, if we're feeling anger, if we feel lonely, or if we feel tired. Those are all things that end up causing us to kind of, leak our personal power and leads us to sometimes doing things that we don't want to do or don't intend to do, that we usually have to go back and apologize about afterwards. So again, as I'm going through this and talking to you about it, optimism versus pessimism, right? And I'm going to get my words up a little bit here. So let's go back again to the whole, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? Now, a lot of times in life, we end up creating kind of binary decisions like that. And so, again, if we were to sit down and argue about this, well, it's either the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. There's two truths. One is true and one is false. And we could argue back and forth, and maybe I believe that the glass is half full, you believe that the glass is half empty. But what I want to stop here and ask you is, are those the only two interpretations that we can make from what we're looking at? Because what ends up happening a lot of times is a lot of the arguments that we have with people, the things that are going on, there's not just one or two options. There's usually a multitude of different options that we can consider. And so when we get in and talk about the seven interpretations, that's going to be one of the tools that you can use to help you, especially if you happen to be interpreting something that is going on and maybe it's negative or not something that you want to actually happen. Is there another way for me to look at this in a different way? Okay. So again, let's go back to our, is the glass half full or the glass half empty? Well, what I would tell you is the glass is always full. The glass is always full, regardless of how much liquid is in it, because there is space within the cup. And in fact, there's a ratio of liquid to air in that cup. So again, the cup is neither half full nor half empty. It's actually always full. It's just the ratio of liquid to air within that glass. So stop and think about that for a while, right? That may be the first time that you've actually heard a different perspective on that old thing. And why am I telling you that? Because again, if we're arguing about the glass is half full or the glass is half empty, and you don't really like either of those stories, maybe there's a different story or a different interpretation that would serve you better than that. And so, again, the interpretation that I have taken is the glass is neither half full nor half empty. It's always full. It's full of air and it's full of whatever liquid happens to be in there. So let's get in now and talk about, as I kind of wrap up here on this little tip or hack that you can use when you find yourself in a situation where maybe you're starting to become more pessimistic or you're starting to look at things in a negative way and you want to get yourself out of it. Okay, so again, this is a tool to help you change your interpretation, change the way you're thinking about it. If you want to think everything is horrible and negative, then you can just keep on doing that. But if you actually want to change your emotional state, if you want to grow and you want to get out of those feelings, maybe of fear and anxiety related to a particular thing, here's one way that you can do that. And it's called the seven interpretations. Okay. Now, this is the kind of thing that I share with people in the briefing leadership program that I run all the time. But as I told you before, I want to give you little tips here each week. But if you want all of them, they're in the briefing leadership program. So, but this one, the seven interpretations, here is how this would work. So again, let's say that something ends up happening, and I'm going to come up with kind of a generic thing to be able to help explain this idea. Because we end up in relationships with people all the time, every day that we're relating to somebody. And so again, let's assume I'm going to use my wife and myself as an example. Okay, is let's say that her and I end up out on our back patio, we're sitting down, and we're just enjoying some quiet time. And I can sense that she's annoyed at something. Okay, I don't know what it is, and so at that point, right, I can start making different interpretations about what's going on. This is our glass half full, half empty kind of thing, right? I could sit there and say, oh, my wife is a little annoyed. What did I do wrong today? Or what did I do that maybe annoyed her and now she's mad at me? Okay, that's an interpretation that I could start to make. My wife is annoyed, therefore I must have done something to annoy her, and maybe she's mad at me now. Okay, that's an interpretation. And I could go with that. And all of a sudden I could start, feeling like she doesn't like me right now. I've done something wrong. And you can end up going down a whole rabbit hole and you can see how that could end up affecting my emotional state, right? Because now all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh no, maybe I did something wrong. I'm not feeling that great about myself. What did I forget to do this time? Oh, dumb Jason, whatever, right? It starts going through my head, coming out of my mouth, and me being worried or in some sort of fear or anxiety that she's mad at me for some reason. Now, that's one interpretation. Are there any other interpretations that could be there? Well, of course there are, right? Someone else could have annoyed her. Maybe she just got off the phone with one of her friends or a family member and that annoyed her. And it had absolutely nothing to do with me. Maybe she just has a headache. And it's not, I'm looking at her thinking that maybe she is annoyed. And instead, she just has a headache, right? You can see where this could end up going, right? So the idea with the seven interpretations is if you are in a situation and you don't really like the interpretation that you're getting or that you're seeing from this, sit down and write out seven other interpretations that could relate to this. So again, right? Maybe I didn't do anything. Maybe, she talked to a friend or family and they annoyed her. Maybe she has a headache, right? There's three. Go through until you get through to seven and then stop and take a look at that and think about which of those interpretations actually serves me the best. And that's the one that you go with. Okay. Because the reality is, I mean, I know I've done this myself. Sometimes I just get annoyed and I don't know why, right? Something happened. I don't even remember, but maybe all of a sudden I'm kind of feeling like in a little bit of a funk. And people do that, right? I might not even realize. And so again, there's no reason for me to worry and fret about that because it's probably not true anyway. And so, what we can do is actually come up with interpretations that serve us better. So again, if I sit down and I see that my wife is annoyed, I'm not going to pick an interpretation that says, "Oh, she must be mad at me because I did something wrong." That doesn't really serve me. It doesn't really serve her either, as well, right? And again, I can start asking questions. We can kind of see what's going on at that point. But sometimes, and let's take this back to what I told you before, is a lot of times when we start feeling pessimistic or we're worried about things or we're fearful about things, a lot of times it's because of an interpretation that we are making about something that is going on. And again, a lot of times we feel like, well, things are happening to me. And instead, change your interpretation to it's not happening to me, but it's happening for me. And so, as an example, right, if we happen to be working on something, we're working through something, or maybe, um, yeah, as an example, right, somebody that you may be talking to and they're really struggling with something that's going on in their life. And again, it's what is it, that's going on in their particular mind that's leading them to feel that particular way, right? And so again, I've seen this in my life, certain things that are happening to where it just feels like something is really, really hard, as an example, right? That I just can't get something done. Well, what's the interpretation that I'm putting on that? Am I putting an interpretation on it that, because it's really hard and because I'm having a hard time doing it, that it's not something that I should do or that it has something to do with me as an individual, that I have no worth, that I'm stupid, that I'm whatever, right? And I'm saying some of these things. And, again, what we don't realize is a lot of times we are actually saying things like that in our head. right? Well, what's the interpretation that I want to put on it? Is it going to be hard? Is that the interpretation that I want to put on it? Or do I want to put a different interpretation on it, like it's easy, something that I can actually work through? Or maybe it's actually something that I no longer need to pursue myself, right? And so again, sometimes we can push, and we end up hurting ourselves more. Let me give you an example of this, right? When I was a teenager, I wanted to play professional basketball. I loved basketball when I was a teenager. Um, I wasn't very good. I'll give you that, okay? But I really enjoyed playing basketball. The problem was I stopped growing at about 5'9". So I'm only 5'9". That's not a very good height to play in the National Basketball Association. Okay. You need to be much, much taller than that in order to be able to play in the NBA. Now, at that point, again, I have to decide and make a different interpretation. Is that something that I want to continue trying to pursue? Or is there another path that I should go down? And again, I'm not going to beat myself up over the fact that I didn't become a professional basketball player. That would not do me any good, right? There's other things that I'm good at. I don't have to play in the NBA. And so the fact that I can actually make a different interpretation about that and choose to move on and do something different is what we need to do, right? So again, there are things that we can do um, to move on, to change, and to just leave the past behind us. Because as I talked about to begin with, and I see this in so many people is, and again, as I said, especially now, because of a lot of the things that we're going through, a lot of people feel like we're never going to get out of this COVID thing, right? A lot of people are starting to go down that path and feel like it's gonna take forever. This is never going to change. Things are getting worse, and oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Well, again, we can just stop and choose to change our interpretation, choose to change our perspective as well, right? And so again, there's always opportunity in everything that's going on. Hopefully, you've seen, and I know I've seen this in my family and with others, is this has been an opportunity, right, to see the optimistic, the positive side of this, in that, I think now we all appreciate the people in our lives a little bit more. We are getting a little bit out of the rat race and realizing and starting to focus more on what is actually important to us. And again, that's really what we should be getting out of anytime things like this are coming along. So don't think that the world is falling all apart. It is not. Things are actually good if we can, continue to stay positive and really kind of keep that positive, optimistic attitude. Again, if you feel like you're having struggles with that, then again, stop, think about what are some other different interpretations that you can put on this, and try to find an optimistic or positive spin about it. And what I'm telling you, I'm not telling you not to be realistic, but there's a lot of stories that we tell ourselves that don't serve us. And so again, let's be more positive. The glass is always full, and try to find, again, other interpretations for you to be happier, to have a more positive mental attitude, and to actually go out and get the things in life that you want. Because I'll tell you, being a pessimist and being a victim just keeps you stuck where you are. And it's only by trying to break through that and get moving forward that you can actually have a life that you want, that's beyond your wildest dreams. And with that, I'm going to wrap up for today, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Jammin' with Jason. See ya. And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Jamming with Jason. Keep on rocking in the audit world, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share with your friends and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know what you enjoyed the most about the podcast, and you may even be featured on a future episode. When you're ready to turbocharge your leadership development, join the Briefing Leadership Program, where you get access to everything in one place and can interact directly with me in the group. If you'd like to earn continuing professional education for listening to today's episode, head on over to C-Risk Academy's video on-demand learning platform at ondemand.criskacademy.com. Not only do you get a CPE certificate, but you will also have access to hundreds of video on-demand learning opportunities. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are that of the individuals and not of their respective organizations.